Welcome to this podcast. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking about Mars's placement in Aries. As is usually my style when delineating these placements, I start by talking about Aries, because at the end of the day, remember I told you that it is the sign that produces the effect of the planet. That's what it means for a planet to be in a sign. The sign produces the effect of the planet. Now, in the case of Mars in Aries, there is a very strong affinity between the nature of Mars and the sign of Aries, such that Mars is said to rule Aries. Okay? Rulerships are just very strong affinities, basically. That's what they mean. And the expression of their individuality is extremely similar. The difference is that Mars is a more focused impulse, while Aries obviously is distributed over 30 degrees. Okay? Mars can only occupy a single point in Aries, and so all of Aries becomes concentrated in the placement that is called Mars. That's what it means to have a planet, which is called a functional light, really. That's what it means to have a functional light in a sign, because the sign itself is a special type of light. Okay, and it gives rise to functional lights, because what those lights do is they introduce a very specific type of functional awareness in your head. That's really what it is. But the exact details and mechanisms I only teach in my classes, because there in my classes we essentially go into the nitty-gritty of what astrology really means, because ultimately what we're describing the human brain. All right, and we're describing human psychology. All right, just because we're using the natal chart and symbols of astrology doesn't mean that we forget what the main object of discussion really is. We're discussing the structure of the mind, the human mind. If you want, you can call it psychodynamics. Okay, I like that name. I've used it a couple of times, but I'm not the original inventor of that name. So, anyway. Mars in Aries. Now, what is Aries? Aries normally would represent usually, would represent the beginning of the zodiac. Because within Aries is contained the origin point. That is, the point that would normally represent the ascendant itself. And I've told you before in my podcasts that the ascendant is an extremely powerful point in the natal chart, especially natal chart synthesis. And the reason for this is because the ascendant prescribes how everything in the natal chart is related together. It also prescribes the theme of the native's life. So that everyone is here for a reason. Everyone is here with a purpose. It is the ascendant that tells you what the general context of that purpose really is. Because no matter what or where all the other functional lights or planets are, their overall meaning must be found within the context of your ascendant. So if you don't know your ascendant point, then you don't really know who you are. Why? Because your ascendant is the deepest, furthest memory you have of yourself. And it was formed at a time when you didn't really have a self. So it represents the point wherein which the sense of self that you experience today as an adult started from. That sense of self is a point around which your entire reality will organize. So when people tell you that your ascendant is a mask, tell them no, your ascendant is not a mask. People don't really see your ascendant, except there's a planet in the first house. What they see is your sense of self, how you construct this sense of I that you are, right? Which you now project into your descendant as your best face forward. You understand? When you meet people, you put your best impression forward, right? That's your ascendant you're projecting into the seventh house. So Aries naturally contains this rising point. Now, most people don't have Aries on their rising point, especially the 0 degrees of Aries. It's really difficult to find that. But the 0 degrees of Aries really contains the energetic point that is the natural ascendant. All right? And so the characteristic of Aries is that it is the amount of energy that is needed to bring forth life, to bring forth innovation, to bring forth a new experience. In fact, Aries is the energy you need for breakthrough. Once Anything, any physical process needs to transition from one state to another state in such a way that the two states are qualitatively different from each other. Then that energy is the energy of Aries. So that when new life needs to be brought into something, new energy, new focus and all that, it always coincides with where you have Aries in your natal chart. It is in where you have Aries that you can renew yourself. I know most people don't, they think that transformations and all that, Scorpios and all. Well, there is a major difference between the transformation suggested by Scorpio and the new renewal experience or renewing experience typified by Aries. Is that the transformation symbolized by Scorpio is very slow, it takes time, and it is very painful. Because it's a change that affects your emotions directly. Aries is not like that. The way Aries renews itself is like bursting into a room or, bursting into an arena. Like a celebrity rapper or celebrity performer just busting onto the stage for the first time and the entire crowd goes wild. That's Aries. That's how it renews itself. It renews itself with a lot of bluster, a lot of energy, a lot of drive, a lot of ambition, a lot of forcefulness. All right? And also a lot of excitement. And when you accumulate all of this together, what you have is what? A tremendous amount of passion released at once. And that energy is necessary because the change of state that is suggested by where Aries is in your natal chart, it means that what life is telling you, what the creator and what nature is telling you is that it is in that area that you constantly need that energy source to be able to push through. And why? It's because you're going to face obstacles there. You're going to face things that require pushing. All right? You're going to have to assert yourself in that area. That's why you have Aries there. You need to fight. Okay? And so what Aries really does is it allows the individual to summon up a tremendous amount of spontaneous energy, which they can now release in an instant. And this is the energy that brings the energy of spring. After the cold, long winter, the freeze, it kind of gives the impression that life will never be able to overcome this barren freeze. But there comes the sun. And after a few weeks of warming, boom, life reemerges as if it never went away. And it reemerges with vigor. That energy, that explosive amount of energy that you need to force through a qualitative change in state, that's Aries. Now, the problem with Aries is that that's all it is. It's not anything more than that. So it's always concerned with the bringing forth, the spontaneous and energetic bringing forth of a new type of reality. Finish. What type of reality that is, whether it will be good for you, whether it's even at the right time, it doesn't know and it doesn't care. Why should it? That's not what it's designed for. In fact, in Aries, there is really no serious implementation of life. At that point, life really doesn't have any meaning. All it is just to bring life into existence, and what life does from there is its own concern. So it is the power of conception, really. When a female egg meets a male sperm and they fuse together, there's an explosion of some kind, like some type of irradiated joy that emerges from that fertilization. That's it. What it does from there, not really important to the energy of Aries. Aries is also concerned with the passion and the drive for sex. Because sex in itself, the orgasm in itself, is a kind of renewing activity. It's a kind of renewal. But it's not the long, drawn-out sex that Scorpio is noted for or Taurus enjoys. Aries is wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. It's the heat of the moment, is the passion. It's the energy to just bring things into existence. And where they go from there is not really important. So it is a firecracker. That's the energy that it is. It's an explosive force. It contains the energy to allow you to renew yourself or to start things from scratch. And it's necessary because if there's one thing that typifies the Arian experience more than any, is the fact that you constantly start all over again in Aries. So it depends on where you have Aries on which house of your natal chart. In that area, you're constantly starting over and over again. Why? Because Aries doesn't have a common sense. No, it's not an insult to Aries. It hasn't developed to the level where it actually considers anything like common sense. Its job is just to bring things across, to transport things into a new medium, and that's about it. What happens thereon, it doesn't know and it doesn't care. So it is usually an energy that does things without thinking. That's why astrologers consider it impulsive. Because it hasn't developed the ability for self-reflection. It hasn't even developed the ability to recognize that it has a body as a self. That happens in Taurus. So all it is an announcement, really. Aries is the loudest announcement you can get. Screaming on the megaphone, I just arrived. Yeah, what have you come to do? It doesn't know. Where are you going from here? It doesn't know. And it doesn't care. So Aries really is an energy for the moment. And I need you to understand this intuitively. It's something that comes into being, usually from a state that is about to end or something like that. It bursts into being, and the way it shows up in the psyche is as a new motivation. Usually people who have dominant Aries placements, they're always coming up with new ideas or new ways of being. Yesterday they decided they were going to be a dancer, and today all of that is gone. Today they want to be a fireman or a firewoman, and the next day they want to be a hairstylist, and the next day they want to be a race car driver, and on it goes like that. And if you have an Aries friend or someone with typical Aries placements, I'm talking about significant personal placements in Aries, you should have become accustomed to this type of behavior, because that's just the way they are. They're constantly searching for that renewal. And when they have begun to lose their way, what you find is you find someone who drifts through life, despite the fact that they're applying so much focus and so much pressure. They're constantly pushing themselves. They're constantly busy, but they ain't going nowhere. Okay? Because they keep opening the same door over and over again. They really, that type of situation, it means that the person is revolving around the beginning of something. They can't really move forward because they don't know how to move forward. Usually the problem is in the next sign, Taurus. And when you have impairments with Taurus, it means that the Arian energy cannot become anything. It's blocked. So the person keeps going round and round and round and round because they're driven, they're preoccupied with actualizing that Arian energy. But because of the impairment in Taurus or in the second house or thereabout, they cannot find an outlet for that. So they keep recycling the energy. And the way that you notice this is that they keep starting new things. They never bother to finish anything. In fact, that is the key signature within Aries as when it starts being dysfunctional. They never finish anything. And if you really know them, you get a hint of the fact that, look, I thought you started this yesterday. Oh no, today I'm doing something else. And then they're going to gaslight you if you point it out to them. They're going to tell you that you're always stuck in the past. You don't know how to move forward. And there is nothing you can do or say to really convince them that that's not how moving forward occurs. You got to try to finish something. All right? But that's really what it is. Now, when you have Mars in Aries, that's a double whammy. And that much concentration of energy usually is because there is a major need for that energy in the life of the person. Okay? So the only reason why you need to renew yourself very often like that is because you're going to get smacked down pretty often. And you need the ability to, the oomph and the zest to pick yourself back up. And all of this is taking place within the mind. Okay? So that Mars in Aries is able to generate at the moment, in the moment, a tremendous amount of energy. To summon it as if from who knows where. And that makes them explicitly prone to violence. That's really what it is. Because like I told you, Aries itself is not really big on the reason why it is summoning a force. It just summons the force and that's about it. But when Mars is in Aries, that's a double whammy of that. So that at the slightest provocation, it can summon up a tremendous amount of energy. And so these people have very quick tempers. They're very forthright and direct, not because they're particularly honest people. It's because it will take time and effort to actually be deceptive. And they would rather smack you over the head than be deceptive. They would rather smack you over the head in the moment. Okay? So these are not people who are very keen on tactical, strategic moves per se, except there are other stabilizing factors in the natal chart, usually balanced by a good aspect to Saturn. But without this, then the Mars in Aries personality is very impulsive. So that the idea is the constant opening of doors, the constant release of energy. And so they have an extremely high sexual libido. They really feel like having sex every moment. It's not a figure of speech. That's really what it is, not a figure of speech. They want it now, here now, and then maybe in the next 15 minutes or the next 20 minutes or the next 1 hour. It may not just be with the same person. You understand? Because the thing about Aries is that Aries is a natural discovery process. Think about the birth of human life. A child is born, they scream. They're screaming because they're suddenly thrust into a new type of experience, a new type of awareness, and they have no other way to express themselves. Aries, and especially Mars in Aries, is addicted to that thrusting process. They're highly sexed. And once they become used to, or once they become very familiar with an environment, a person, a situation, then they have the constant need to refresh their worldview. It just might so happen that that refreshment does not include you anymore. And so they have this habit of moving on. Of course, they always look for a reason why they need to move on. They probably blame it on someone else because, did I tell you, Mars in Aries is literally incapable of accepting responsibility for anything. And there's a reason why. It doesn't know what responsibility is. Aries hasn't evolved to the point where it considers the nature of consequence. Aries is a spontaneous movement. It's an explosion of force. It's the action itself rather than the reason for the action. That's really what it is. So you can't expect it to be careful of what it does when it does. It acts. If it knocks down a couple of things or crashes a couple of things while it acts, then it says whatever. That's just collateral damage. And so what happens is that Mars in Aries runs into its fair share of confrontations. Because you treat people that way and people are going to say, hey, wait a minute now. You broke this and you broke that. Whereas Mars in Aries is going to say, hey, look, that wasn't my fault. That was just me acting. Yeah, but someone's got to pay for that. That's really what it is. Now, like I've said earlier, they're not devious people in particular. They're not. And they're not very big on lies either. It's not because they're honest. It's because they don't have the time for that. They're on to the next thing before they have the need to be deceptive or to whatever. So you'd probably catch them at a couple of things when they, in their awkward attempts to try to be cunning and deceptive. And then when you catch them, be prepared for a fight because they're not going to back down. They're going to be like, and so what? So what? They're going to find a way to blame it on you because, like I said, with Mars and Aries, the taking of responsibility is not part of their nature. And so they usually have this tendency to try to push that, gaslighting. Because the aim of Mars and Aries is the focus is the self. So they come across as extremely self-centered, but they don't see it that way. How would you blame them in that respect? They are not equipped with the ability to see things from other people's point of view. They see it only from theirs. They act only from their point of view. And when you are contrary to that, they wonder what's wrong with you. I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? It's about them and not you. Why can't you just understand it? It doesn't matter that the opposite is often, very often, the truth. Because truly, what is the nature of Mars? Where does it come from? What is it about the Martian energy in the human psyche that gives it this type of strong affinity with Aries? And that's because Mars is that aspect of aggression within a human being that really is fed from the sexual act itself. The physical energy needed to have sex. That's what Mars is. And so your Martian nature really is the way that you get angry. The way that you respond when you're angry. That's really what it is. You can always tell, to some extent, the placement of someone's Mars by the way they behave when they're angry. When Mars is in Aries, their response is to get physical. Aggressive physically. So such people, since they can summon up and build up a tremendous amount of energy, one of the ways in which they keep sane, because all of that is very difficult to handle, because they're buzzing like live wires. They're literally buzzing with a lot of sexual energy, which they need to get rid of somehow. So most of them, they take up competitive sports, or maybe just, training and all that, but they need to get rid of a tremendous amount of energy. It's either they get it off constructively, or it all goes into sex. That's really what it is. Or they're aggressive. They can't really have relationships because they're too aggressive and too brusque. And men with Mars and Aries are drawn to the gym, lifting weights, having a good body. And you would know these type of men because from the beginning to the end, it's all about them, their body, how they take care of their body, how they treasure their body, and how people are always admiring their body. You see the focus? The focus appears to always be the self. But it's a childlike type of experience. It's not a conceited experience like you would have in Leo. Alright? It's Mars. It's Aries. So it's a selfish but childlike perspective. It's an innocence that says, look, I don't even know that you exist. If I did, I would consider you, but I don't know. Alright? Leo is, I know that you exist, but I'm better than you. Do you understand the difference? Now, if you're having a conversation with Mars and Aries, you better be ready to talk and listen at the same time. Because that's how they carry on conversations. Sometimes it's weird, who is actually doing the listening and who is doing the talking. Because both parties are talking at the same time, but they have no problems. They're having a real conversation and they're all very excited. And, they spend hours talking, but they're both talking simultaneously. Usually the way this happens, one person talks and the other one listens, and then the roles are reversed. But these two people are talking at the same time, and at the same time they're listening to themselves. It's not the traditional way of having a conversation, but that's what happens when you have Mars in Aries. There's simply no patience for something to build into something else. In fact, if you want to scare these people away, tell them that something requires time to build into something else, and by the time you finish completing your statement explaining what needs to happen, they're gone. Now, if you want to really screw with these people's mind, just put them in a task that is repetitive and meaningless. You drive them crazy. They'd become frustrated, and one day, it doesn't matter who you are, you could be the boss, but one day they're going to give you a dirty punch or a dirty slap, or they're going to insult you and just walk away. It's just the way that they are. They probably don't mean it. They'll regret it the very next minute, but in the moment, they can't help it. Because there's a tremendous buildup of energy, a surge, and that needs to go somewhere. Alright? And I've explained that when you have Mars and Aries in your natal chart, it's because your reality system, your life, the story of your life, the journey, it's going to require that surge of energy, and it's going to require it periodically. In the area where you have this, you're going to have to renew and renew. Now, it doesn't always work to your advantage, because usually if you have it in a house where you need stability, renewal becomes a challenge. Constant renewal becomes the challenge. If you have it in a house where you're supposed to have intimacy, the constant renewal is going to do what? It's going to make sure that you're never going to be able to connect in such a vulnerable way with another human being. Because the moment things begin to become really serious and vulnerable, you're gone. And in some houses, you may have it in houses that are very fixed. And then renewal becomes a challenge because it's a struggle to renew the experience of life. So it all depends on the configuration within the natal chart. And that's why, despite the fact that I give these podcasts delineating these aspects, they must always be synthesized within the context of the entire natal chart. So in essence, Mars in Aries is the continuous pressure to renew the sense of self-identity which you feel. And this always shows out projecting to what is considered to be a descendant. That descendant is always opposite the 0 degrees of Aries point. And so the way that this shows up in the psyche is that the individual is constantly trying to be different things to different people, and they expect the same in return. When the Mars placement is in Aries, the individual needs to feel that stimulation of renewed contact. So one of the best ways to constantly keep this person is to be mysterious to them. Resist them. Don't be available to them all the time. In fact, this is something with Aries. It expects novelty in the world to match its own internal state that is constantly like a revolving door. If you make yourself available to them all the time, they will leave you. Not because they are no longer fond of you or anything, but you don't satisfy that aspect of their self that requires novelty. They need to be mesmerized and dragged along. They come off all bullying and brusque, but the reality of the matter is that they want to be led, and they want to be led by whatever the object of their affection is. So a man wants to be led along by his woman. He wants to feel, because he knows he's a big, strong man, right? But he wants to feel like a hopeless man, in love. So he wants to be led. The woman is the same. She wants to guess about you because she loves the excitement. And even when she started to figure you out, she's going to want to hold on longer by creating situations for you to do something different. And these are unconscious motivations. So she's not going to come out to say this is exactly what it is. Or he's not going to come out to say that this is exactly what it is, because they probably don't even know. But the desire is there within the person. And then when their interest begins to wane, other aspects of the natal chart that are more reflective try to compensate and say, hey, look, you don't just walk away from a relationship with someone just because you consider them boring. So they're going to look for a reason, because that aspect of Aries cannot take responsibility. So they will find a reason to blame it all on you or whoever it is that the partner is. This is how their psychology works. So in order to be able to be in a relationship with this person, you need to know the person that you're in a relationship with. And you need to know that this is how their mentality works. And I've already said that when things begin to break down, their lives turn into revolving doors in terms of their type of identity that they have. They constantly try to renew that as a way of renewing their own reality. So when things begin to go wrong in their life, the first thing they will do is to ditch somebody. They will find a scapegoat or something in their reality to ditch that person and say, okay, this is the person that is negative vibes around me and all that. Even though that is not the evidence. This is just how their mentality works. So people who are in a relationship with Mars and Aries, of course, all of this is attenuated because of synthesis in the natal chart. Okay? But at least you need to know the type of mentality that comes into the entire picture itself. Very important. So you can adjust your expectations. Okay? Otherwise, they're excellent people to have around. And there's never a dull moment with them around. They're always fun, always active, and always seeking out novel experiences. So I talked about self-renewal, and in going back to it and just touching on it a moment, because there's a point I really want to make here. The reason why Mars and Aries is constantly trying to renew their experience is because they're constantly trying to renew themselves. And the reason why they're constantly trying to renew themselves is because there's an aspect of themselves that they do not find palatable. They feel as if it can be improved upon. It's like trying to wash out a stain, and you keep adding detergent to it, and you keep trying to wash it. That's what's going on within them. They are trying to perfect themselves in a way that only they can really understand. And that is what leads to the need for constant renewal of self-expression, constant renewal of experiences. Because they feel that by changing that environment and renewing it, that they can change who they really are. Of course, that's not the way it works. What needs to happen is there needs to be an address to that aspect of the self that is constantly trying to change. Its motivations need to be assessed. And usually that is what is coded for in the natal chart. These desires and these motivations. Because it is within that type of placement that a motivation or a drive is placed. And usually if you have a connection to Pluto in the natal chart, that drive, that thing that needs to be perfected, takes on an obsessive compulsion to it. And the individual is therefore constantly trying to renew this experience. They're constantly working on themselves. And that's what leads to the change in identity, frequent change in identity. Now, the identities they want to change into, they don't often implement it fully. So they never really become that thing. But the desire to start it is always there. And then they start and they don't finish. They start and they don't finish. Now, Mars in Aries might just be, or might just have the greatest number of starts without finishes ever in the history of astrological placements. Alright? It's just something that they do. And if they are not aware of why, the underlying motivations themselves, then this could be taken into very many areas of their lives without fully understanding why. And so they come across as extremely shallow, as not really being present, because they're always on the move and always on the go. So the idea in natal chart synthesis is to try to figure out precisely what it is that is leading to this need for continuous renewal. Usually it is something very deep about the nature of that personality, the nature of the formation of the identity that the person represents, and the need to be something. They need to identify as something. That's where it usually goes wrong, because the identity making process really is the attachment of a label to self. Because like I told you, self has no label intrinsically. It is nothing per se. All right. But when you come down to a world of structure, you need to be something. You need to be called something. It's almost like saying that you need to have a name. And it is that naming process that's where everything begins to go wrong. Okay. And the signature for that is that their life becomes like a revolving door. They're always coming and going. They never seem to be arriving anywhere in particular. Mars in Aries requires the right physical compatibility with a partner. Don't go take a partner that is not compatible with your energy and your drive and your need for frequent sexual expression. Because that frequent sexual expression is how you stay in control. If you didn't, most of them are seriously into masturbation anyway, because they need to get rid of that energy. If they couldn't live amongst normal people. They really couldn't. It's not a joke. They'll fight everybody. They're going to slap everybody and punch everybody in the face. So in order to basically drain that energy, most of them engage in sports, like I've said, but they also engage in a lot of sex, like I've said. And if they're not doing either of this, then they're serial masturbators. They take it very seriously. They don't joke with it. They don't really have what normal people experience as shame. They don't know what that is. For you to feel shame, you need to consider other people and their perspectives. Mars in Aries doesn't. It doesn't even know that you're there. Alright? If it did, it will probably think about you, but it doesn't know. It never stays around in the moment long enough to recognize that other people actually exist. That's your typical Mars in Aries. The energy and the drive that it summons is not long lasting like you have Mars in Capricorn, which is slow to build up, very long lasting. Mars in Taurus, which is very slow to build up. But when it gets going, it's really tough to stop. Mars in Aries are sudden bursts of energy, frequent, periodic, but sudden, and they come in as physical expressions. So that manner of energy is usually given to people whose life needs that challenge. And if they're not challenging themselves competitively, then they're fighting people. They're quarreling with people. Or, it's all being drained in some type of sexual activity. So they have the tendency to be very promiscuous. It's not because, it's not the allure of sex. It's not that. It's the fact that when the energy builds up, it explodes within them. Alright? So they need to get it out. That tiredness that they feel once they have come, that is what they're really looking for. Because in that mode, they can be like everybody else. Otherwise, they're like overclocked computers. They're just in excess drive. And in that mode, they can be very destructive because they really don't know the nature of consequence.